This is part 3 of the Craftsman King Seeley 100 Drill Press Rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 2, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we will be continuing with the disassembly. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. First thing we're going to be doing is removing the external retaining ring that's inside the bottom bore for the spindle pulley assembly in the head casting. And in this drill press, there is a spiral retaining ring that was probably installed by the previous owner. Next, we're going to be disassembling the motor. So you've got 2 screws on the bottom of the motor that hold this cover panel on, and under this is the capacitor, and these are commonly referred to as sardine can capacitors. There's a piece of cardboard that's used for shielding, and there's another piece of cardboard on top of the capacitor. And next we're going to be removing the switch that is on the base of the motor. So it's got a lock nut that can be just spun off, and then the switch will push back through the base. You've also got an on-off panel there. And then we can undo the wires that are connected to the switch. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut the 2 leads that go to the capacitor. And I'm going to mark the capacitor. These are not polarized, but I mark them anyways. And then I'll put some tape and mark the 2 leads coming out of the motor, so I know where they go when we reassemble all this. And I do this with all the wiring on the motor, and it definitely helps out with reassembly. And if you're disassembling a motor for the first time, I recommend that you take lots of pictures as you disassemble it. Otherwise, it's real easy to get lost in what wire goes where later on. And next we're going to remove the 2 bolts that hold the base to the stator. And this other one we can't get to right now because the power cord is in the way, so we're just going to go ahead and cut that because we're going to replace that power cord anyways. And this was a 2-wire power cord, so there was no ground on it at the time, but we will be grounding the motor. And this is the rubber grommet that I'm removing now, and we'll replace that. And again, we're just going to put tape on those wires and mark them. Most of these wires are real stiff, which is really common for these motors. But if there's no breaks in them, then there's no reason to replace them. When we clean up the motor, we'll take a better look at the wiring and figure out if any of them have to be replaced. So again, we'll go ahead and remove that second bolt that's holding the base on the motor. And with those two bolts removed, we can lift the base off of the motor. And that was to the power cord, so we can go ahead and mark that as well. Okay, so now we have the terminal bar, and there's no cover here, so that's what I was pointing at. So we're going to have to fabricate a cover. I'm going to go ahead and remove the two nuts that are holding the two wires that we can see. So on this terminal bar, there's wires that are connected from this side, and then there are wires that are connected from the underside. And on the terminal bar, each one of those points or terminals is marked with a number. So if you can clean it off with a toothbrush or something and see where they're connected, then you can just mark them accordingly. So for that one, you can see it says T2, and that's for the top side of the terminal bar in the number 2 spot. And this one will be T4 probably. Yep, T4. So next we're going to remove the 4 screws that hold on the felt retainer. And a couple of these screws are pretty boogered up. Likely somebody had the pulley that sits above them too low and it was riding on top of those screws. I was able to get 3 of them off, but that 4th one is just too boogered up. So there's a couple ways to deal with this, but the easiest way is to just put a cutoff wheel inside a Dremel and recut the notch inside the screw for the flat tip screwdriver. That's what I'm doing here. This is a Fordham. It's basically a Dremel on a flex shaft. And so once we've got that notch in there, then we can go ahead and turn that screw out. And we can lift the felt retainer off. Then you've got the felt. And under the felt, you've got a metal end cap. There goes the felt and the end cap. And then there is a paper gasket right there. And then we'll do the same thing on the other end of the motor. The 4 screws. Now I will add a link to the owner's manual for this motor, which has a parts diagram in it, in the description of the video. So this is a 115.6962 motor. It's a half horsepower, 1750 RPMs. Again, there's the felt. The end cap. And sometimes that gasket sticks to that, so there it is. And there's a spring washer here, which is common. That's to take up the play in the rotor. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove the 4 long screws. So these just have cap nuts on each end. There's 4 of them, so this is the 4th one here. And then we're just going to use a screwdriver and tap on the edge of the end frame to start separating it from the stator. And we'll work our way around until they separate. And next we're going to remove the stator band. So this is just folded over steel. So once we've bent it up like that, we can slide the 2 pieces apart and then pull that off of the motor. We're probably going to fabricate a new stator band for this motor. So here I'm just using a 2-prong puller, and I'm going to pull this end cap or end frame off of the rotor, and the bearing will stay with the rotor. And inside there you've got an air cone, and we'll remove it later. So here we'll just use the puller again to pull the bearing off of the rotor. And you'll notice that the end of the bearing that you can see is open. There's no shielding on it. And that was common for some of these bearings back in the day. You can still get this exact same bearing, or you can get it with a shield on there. The idea was you could lubricate the bearings without having to remove them. You could just pull off all that felt cover and the end cap and then put some grease in the bearing and then put all that back on. So here we're going to go ahead and put the other end frame back on the motor so that we can set it on that end frame rather than setting it directly on the windings. To be able to pull this end frame, which is the terminal end frame, and on this end frame, the bearing stayed inside the frame. So now we can pull out the rotor, set that aside. And this end frame still has the terminal bar and a couple other items still screwed to the end frame. So we don't want to just pull it off of there because we'll end up ripping some of that wiring. And I was like, what the hell just fell out of there? And that, my friends, is the bottom of a sheave for the motor pulley that used to be on this motor, which would explain why this motor had the wrong size pulley on there now. And that's probably how those screws got boogered up. So, kind of amazed that that was inside there, but we can work with it. So here we're just removing the screws. You probably can't see it, but that is the overload protection assembly. And if those go bad, you can still buy them and replace it. One of the mount points on this one is broken, but it still functions fine, so I probably won't replace it. They don't cost a whole lot of money, like 20 bucks, but yeah. And so now we can remove the screws that hold the governor switch assembly in place. And so this has the switch shield, which is metal, the switch insulation, which is cardboard, and then the switch assembly. And now I'm undoing the screws that hold in the terminal bar. And then we can pull that end frame off of there. So to get that bearing out of there, we're just going to use a wooden dowel. And we'll just drive it out of there. And that's that end frame. So now we got all this wiring and the terminal bar and the switch. There's the switch. We can set that aside, make sure it's working. And we can go ahead and disassemble the last connecting wires to the terminal bar. And again, as we do this, we'll just mark each one of those wires so we know where they came from. And this motor's in pretty good shape. It's real dirty right now, but the capacitor looks great and the windings look like they're in good shape. So once we get it cleaned up and painted and everything and reassembled, I'm sure it'll run for another 50 years. No problems. And this model motor is my favorite motor to pair with the 100s and the 150s. I love these 69, 62 motors. You can find them on eBay selling for about $100 here and there. Shipping may cost you a little more, but you can usually find them locally if you just check Craigslist or whatever. And they're a perfect motor for the drill presses. And there's your stator. So now we're just going to remove that air cone. It has 2 screws that hold it in the end frame. The one part that I forgot to disassemble on this motor, and I didn't realize it until later, was the overload protection panel that's on the outside of the other end frame. And it's got some graphics on it written that came off when I put it inside the simple green, but no big deal. And so here we're just going to disassemble the governor. It has 2 springs on each side. And these springs, they can break. And if they do break, there's a way to figure out what size you need, and you can order a replacement from McMaster Car. But to fully disassemble the governor, you have to bend out these parts of the mount to be able to remove the wing parts that fly out as it spins. And then you can remove the governor itself. And it's got a plastic sleeve, a spring, a little washer that goes on the bottom of the spring, kind of a cup washer type thing. And then there's a white paper shim or insulator down at the bottom. That's it there. And then that is completely disassembled. So next we're going to remove the Craftsman King Seeley logo panel that's on the head frame. This is held in by 2 drive screws, so you just need like a 1/16 of an inch punch, and you can punch those back through the head. If you had the engine turn panel on the head, you can remove it the same way. And I will be adding an engine turn panel to this head. And there you go. And we're going to remove the model number plate off the base. Same. Just going to use a punch to drive those drive screws out. And there it is. So the one thing that I like to do is I paint the nose on my drill presses different colors than the rest of the head. So I'm just using a file here to really help define that nose. And that's pretty much the last thing we're going to be doing in this video. That's everything disassembled at this point. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. Video number 4 will be coming out shortly. And as always, I appreciate all of the support here and on Garage Journal. If you have questions or comments, post them in the section below, and I will see you next time.